Good morning, Kippison Middle School. Good morning, 8th graders. Mr. Franklin here. Today we're going to have our final lesson on World War II. And then starting next week, we're going to get into the Civil Rights Movement. So please make sure you're paying close attention. You're really focused. You are on point with your learning today. I have a couple of announcements. My first announcement, listen to the thunder. It's raining. My first announcement is that we have a special guest coming to our Zoom Fest tomorrow. Special guest you're going to be really excited about. Now, our Zoom Fest is at 3:30. That special guest is none other than Mr. SJ. So Mr. SJ will be at our Zoom Fest tomorrow at 3:30. So make sure you show up at Zoom Fest. He's excited to see all of you. He's going to show up again tomorrow. Mr. SJ will be at our Zoom Fest. So I want to see everybody there. So right now we're going to have a presentation on the end developments that took place at the end of the war, and it will prepare you for learning about what's called the Cold War when you get to high school. All right, so let's jump right into our presentation. All right, so what things took place at the end of the war? The first major event you need to know about is the Yalta Conference. Now, there were 3 different meetings of all the Allied leaders that took place near the end and after the war. The most important was the Yalta Conference. The Yalta Conference took place in February of 1945. It was a meeting of all the Allied countries, and the goal of the Yalta Conference was to decide, okay, we're clearly going to win this war. Germany has surrendered. We are about to defeat Japan. How are we going to split up Europe? All right, how are we going to split up Asia? How are we going to split up everything that Japan took over? How are we going to divvy that back up and out? And how was the post-World War world split up? The Soviets took East Germany. So Germany defeated. They're actually going to be split into 2. On the eastern side of Germany, it's going to be controlled by Russians, and the United States, Britain, and France were going to control West Germany. So Germany was actually split in half. Berlin was divided 4 different ways as well. So you ended up having a Soviet side on East Berlin, and on the west side, you have a democratic Berlin, Germany, which is a city in Germany. Winston Churchill, of course, the leader of Britain at the time, spoke of an iron curtain across Europe separating East and West. So what you see happening is in the sphere of influence, which I'll talk about in a second, in the West, in Europe, was divided on the East by the Soviets, so the communists, and the democratic countries, the democratic allies like the United States, France, and Britain on the West. There was similar occupation in Korea. The Soviets, aka the communists, aka the Russians, controlled North Korea, and the United States had a sphere of influence on South Korea. So what is sphere of influence? After you read this, I'm going to have you pause and type it in your Google form. Sphere of influence is a country or area in which another country has power to affect developments, although it has no formal authority. So this sphere of influence, again, you see these blue countries are sort of influenced by the United States and Western democracy, and these red countries are going to be influenced by Russia. So the important thing that you need to know, is that after World War II, Europe was divided into 2 spheres of influence. Russia, aka the Soviet Union, a communist empire, a communist country, influenced many countries in the eastern part of Europe to become communist, to become communist countries. And in the western part of Europe, you have the United States, France, and Great Britain influencing countries to maintain democracy, essentially. So which countries were influenced by whom? So the Soviet Union is going to influence Poland, Czechoslovakia, Eastern Germany, and China. So all these are going to become communist countries. The United States influenced Greece, Turkey, pretty much all of Western Europe, and Japan to maintain or become democracies. So you see the world essentially splitting into communist or democracy. And that is going to lead to what is called the Cold War, which we're not going to learn about here in 8th grade, but you're going to learn about when you go to high school. You're going to go ahead and pause right now and answer 2 different questions about which countries influenced whom. All right. what was the Truman Doctrine? So this is an important sort of belief system put out by President Truman. It was the opposite of isolationism. So whereas isolationism in the past was the United States stays out of international affairs, the Truman Doctrine is going to be our doctrine for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And many people would say even now we are influenced by the Truman Doctrine. And here's what it is. America should support democracies around the world. So we should intervene to make sure democracy stays strong. We don't want communism. We don't want a communist style of government. We want an American style of democracy. And so we will use our money, we'll use our power, use our military in order to spread influence to make sure countries stay democratic. We're going to intervene to stop the spread of communism. We're going to contain communism where it exists. We're not going to necessarily destroy it. We may work around its edges, but we're going to keep it from spreading around the country. One of these ways is we're going to make sure countries that are being influenced by Russia get financial aid so that they don't want to become communist countries. Perfect example is giving aid to Greece and Turkey. What were examples of containment? So Truman wanted to contain communism, establish a NATO. So these are countries that are friendly to the United States. North American Treaty Organization. So a treaty organization that would use its power in order to contain communism and make sure democracy is spread. The Korean War. We fought an entire Korean War against North Korea. So North and South Korea, again, were split into two different countries, essentially. North Korea would be communist. South Korea would be democratic. And the United States is going to send troops, send airplanes, send our military over to Korea and fight, help support the South Koreans against the North Koreans. And, of course, Russia and China are going to send troops to North Korea to help spread communism. Even now, the separation between North and South Korea still exists. North Korea is, of course, a communist regime. South Korea is a democracy. That country is split into two. So that people, the Korean people, are sort of separated from each other between North and South. That legacy exists from the time after World War II till today. We're also going to fight the Vietnam War. Similar situation. North Vietnam is going to tumble and become communist. South Vietnam is going to be a democracy. We're going to fight a war to try to keep Vietnam from becoming communist completely. That's what the Vietnam War was. And then, of course, giving aid to Greece, Turkey, and Afghanistan. The last important thing that you need to know is the Marshall Plan. So this was a plan after World War II, and it ties into the Truman Doctrine. The idea was to give billions of dollars to European countries who were destroyed because of World War II, because of all the bombing and the strife that comes from war, to ensure that they don't become communist, to ensure that Russia doesn't influence. If Russia is giving billions of dollars to these countries, then likely they might adopt or take on the type of government that Russia promoted, which was communism. So the Marshall Plan was a $13 billion program to give aid to Western Europe, to make sure that those countries were influenced by America, that America had influence there, and that Russia would not have the influence. All right, so that is our presentation for today. I want you guys to stay focused, do your work, have an excellent day. I love you guys. Be really, really focused today, and I want 100% completion.